Welcome back to our channel. Today, we are bringing you an incredible and inspiring story. The journey of a poor boy who turned his dream into one of the most prestigious watch brands in the world, Rolex. Rolex is one of the most famous and respected watch brands in the world. It represents luxury, precision, and success. But do you know the incredible story behind its creation? Rolex was not founded by a billionaire or a large company. It was created by a young boy named Hans Wilsdorf, who started with nothing but a dream. His journey from poverty to building one of the most valuable watch brands in history is full of struggles, determination, and vision. Let's dive into this fascinating story and learn how a poor boy created Rolex. Chapter 1. A Poor Boy with a Big Dream. A long time ago, in the year 1881, a boy named Hans Wilsdorf was born in a small town in Germany. Life was not easy for him. His family was not rich, and they struggled to make ends meet. But the real tragedy struck when Hans was just 12 years old. Both of his parents passed away. Now he was an orphan. With no parents to take care of him, Hans and his siblings were sent to live with their uncles. The uncles were strict and believed in hard work. They made sure that Hans received a good education, but they also expected him to work hard for everything he wanted. Even as a child, Hans had big dreams. He was not like other kids who only thought about playing. He wanted to do something great, something that would change the world. But at that time, he had no idea what that would be. A love for precision. While studying, Hans developed a love for mathematics and precision. He was fascinated by things that worked perfectly, especially clocks and watches. He often wondered, how do they keep perfect time? How are they made so precisely? His interest in watches grew stronger over the years, and by the time he finished school, he knew he wanted to work in the watch industry. But there was a problem. He had no money and no experience. So at the age of 19, Hans left Germany and moved to Switzerland, the world's capital of watchmaking. He took a job at a company that made watch movements, the tiny, complex parts inside a watch that make it tick. This was his first step into the world of watches. Chapter 2. The First Steps into the World of Watches. At just 19 years old, Hans Wilsdorf packed his bags and left Germany. He had no wealth, no powerful connections, and no certainty about the future. But he had something more valuable, a dream and the determination to chase it. Learning from the best. When Hans arrived in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, he was stepping into the heart of the world's finest watchmakers. Switzerland was famous for its craftsmanship, with skilled artisans who had been making watches for generations. Hans found a job at a company that specialized in exporting Swiss watch movements. His work involved checking the tiny mechanical parts inside watches and ensuring they worked with perfect precision. For many, this would have been just a job. But for Hans, it was an opportunity to learn everything about watchmaking. He observed the masters at work, studied their techniques, and took notes on what made a watch great. Over time, he realized something important. Most watches were too big and unreliable. At that time, pocket watches were the standard. They were large, bulky, and often not very accurate. People carried them in their pockets and had to pull them out to check the time. Wristwatches were considered unreliable and mainly worn by women as jewelry. But Hans saw the future differently. He believed that one day everyone would wear a watch on their wrist, a watch that was small, precise, and stylish. a new vision is born. While working at the Swiss watch company, Hans started thinking, what if I could make wristwatches more accurate? What if I could make them durable and elegant? What if I could create a brand that symbolized quality and prestige? But he was just an employee. He had no money to start his own company, no workshop, and no one to help him. It seemed impossible. However, Hans refused to let go of his dream. He knew he needed to take a risk. After a few years in Switzerland, he decided to leave his job and move to London, England, where he would take the first steps toward building his own watch company. Starting with nothing. In 1905, at the age of 24, Hans partnered with his brother-in-law, Alfred Davis, and started a small business in London called Wilsdorf and Davis. But there was a huge problem. They had no factory, no workers, and no brand name. Instead of making their own watches, Hans and Alfred imported high-quality Swiss watch movements and placed them inside elegant British-made cases. They then sold these watches to jewelers, who put their own brand names on them. At first, business was slow. People still preferred pocket watches, and many doubted that wristwatches would ever become popular. But Hans was patient. He knew that he was ahead of his time, and if he could prove that wristwatches were just as accurate as pocket watches, people would start believing in them. So, he kept improving the quality of his watches, ensuring that they were more precise, more durable, and more stylish than anything else on the market. Finding the right name. By 1908, Hans knew that if he wanted his watches to be truly great, they needed a name that people would remember, a name that sounded powerful, elegant, and global. He tried many different names, but none of them felt right. Then, one day, while riding on a horse-drawn carriage in London, inspiration struck. Hans later recalled, "I tried combining the letters of the alphabet in every possible way. One morning, while riding along Cheapside in London, a genie whispered Rolex in my ear. The name Rolex was short, easy to pronounce in any language, and had a luxurious sound to it. It was perfect. From that day forward, Rolex was born. Hans was no longer just selling watches. He was building a brand that would one day become the most respected name in watchmaking. But he had no idea how difficult the journey ahead would be. Chapter 3. The Pursuit of Perfection. With the Rolex name now in place, Hans Wilsdorf was ready to take his company to the next level. But the road ahead was not easy. At the time, wristwatches were still not taken seriously. Most people, including wealthy businessmen and watchmakers, believed that wristwatches were just a passing trend. They thought pocket watches would always be superior because they were larger and supposedly more precise. But Hans was determined to prove them wrong. He believed that a wristwatch could be just as accurate as a pocket watch, if not better. However, to achieve this, he needed to solve a big problem. The accuracy challenge. In the early 1900s, wristwatches were often unreliable. They would lose time, break easily, or fail to keep precise measurements. The small size of the watch movement made it difficult to maintain the same accuracy as a pocket watch. Hans was obsessed with fixing this. He reached out to some of the best Swiss watchmakers and worked with them to develop highly accurate and compact movements that could fit inside a wristwatch. After years of research, Rolex finally achieved something remarkable. In 1910, a Rolex watch became the first wristwatch in the world to receive the Swiss Certificate of Chronometric Precision. an award previously reserved only for larger pocket watches. It was a huge breakthrough. Rolex had just proven to the world that wristwatches could be just as precise as pocket watches. But Hans wasn't satisfied yet. He wanted Rolex watches to be the most durable timepieces ever made. The waterproof revolution. At the time, most watches had a serious flaw. They were not water-resistant. Dust, sweat, and moisture could easily damage them, making them unreliable for people with active lifestyles. Hans realized that if he could create a completely waterproof watch, it would be a game-changer. After years of experimentation, Rolex introduced the Oyster case in 1926, the world's first truly waterproof wristwatch. To prove its durability, Hans came up with a brilliant marketing idea. In 1927, he approached a young British swimmer named Mercedes Gleitze. She was preparing to swim across the English Channel, one of the most difficult swims in the world. Hans gave her a Rolex Oyster watch and asked her to wear it while swimming. After over 10 hours in freezing water, Mercedes completed her swim, and the Rolex watch was still working perfectly. The news spread like wildfire. Rolex published advertisements showing the watch surviving extreme conditions, and suddenly, everyone wanted to own a Rolex. This was a turning point for the company. Rolex was no longer just another watch brand. It was a symbol of durability, precision, and luxury. The birth of the perpetual movement. Now that Rolex had proven its accuracy and waterproof design, Hans set his sights on solving another problem: automatic winding. At the time, people had to manually wind their watches every day. If they forgot, the watch would stop working. Hans wanted to create a watch that would never stop ticking as long as it was being worn. In 1931, Rolex introduced the perpetual movement, the world's first self-winding mechanism with a perpetual rotor. This was another game-changing invention. The watch would automatically wind itself using the natural motion of the wearer's wrist. It was a revolution in watchmaking, making Rolex even more desirable among professionals, athletes, and adventurers. But Rolex's journey was far from over. Bigger challenges lay ahead. Chapter 4. Rolex, the watch that conquered the world. Hans Wilsdorf had already achieved 3 major breakthroughs. 1. Precision. Rolex was the first wristwatch to receive the Swiss certificate of chronometric precision. 2. Waterproof design. The Rolex Oyster became the world's first truly waterproof wristwatch. 3. Self-winding movement. The Rolex Perpetual made winding a watch a thing of the past. But Hans was not satisfied. He wanted Rolex to be more than just a watch. He wanted it to become a symbol of excellence, adventure, and success. To achieve this, he needed to push Rolex to the limits, to places where no other watch had ever gone before. Rolex and the world's greatest explorers, Hans knew that marketing alone wouldn't be enough. He needed real-world proof that Rolex watches were the toughest and most reliable timepieces ever made. So he decided to partner with the world's greatest adventurers, climbers, and deep-sea divers, people who risk their lives in extreme conditions. In 1933, Rolex watches were worn by the first British expedition to fly over Mount Everest. The freezing temperatures, harsh winds, and extreme altitude didn't affect the watch. It worked perfectly. In 1953, Rolex watches accompanied Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, the first men to reach the summit of Mount Everest. After the climb, Hillary confirmed that his Rolex watch never failed. proving that Rolex was capable of withstanding the harshest conditions on Earth. But Hans wanted to test Rolex even further. Rolex versus the deepest oceans. If Rolex could survive the highest point on Earth, could it also survive the deepest? Hans decided to create a watch that could withstand the crushing pressure of the deep sea. In 1960, a specially designed Rolex watch, the Rolex Deep Sea Special, was attached to the outside of the bathyscaphe Trieste, a deep-sea submersible. The Trieste, piloted by Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh, descended nearly 11,000 meters, 36,000 feet, to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on Earth. After nearly 9 hours underwater, the submersible returned to the surface. Everyone was amazed. The Rolex watch was still working perfectly. This proved once again that Rolex was more than just a luxury brand. It was a watch built for champions, leaders, and pioneers. Rolex becomes a symbol of success. By the 1960s and 70s, Rolex was no longer just a watch. It had become a status symbol. It was worn by world leaders, business tycoons, and Hollywood stars. Some of the most famous Rolex wearers included Winston Churchill, the legendary British Prime Minister, Martin Luther King Jr., the great civil rights leader, Paul Newman, the Hollywood actor and race car driver, Steve McQueen, the king of cool. Having a Rolex was no longer just about telling time. It was about making a statement. It meant that you were successful, hard-working, and at the top of your game. Hans Wilsdorf had achieved his dream. His company, which started with nothing, had become the most prestigious watch brand in the world. But Hans was not done yet. He wanted to leave a lasting legacy, something that would ensure Rolex's success even after he was gone. Chapter 5. A legacy that lives forever. Hans Wilsdorf had built Rolex into a world-renowned brand, but he knew that true success wasn't just about making money. It was about creating something that would last forever. Now, in his later years, Hans began to think about the future of Rolex. He had no children to inherit the company, and he feared that if Rolex fell into the wrong hands, it might lose its values, innovation, and excellence. He needed a plan, something that would protect Rolex's legacy long after he was gone. The birth of the Rolex Foundation. In 1945, Hans Wilsdorf made a bold and unprecedented decision. Instead of selling Rolex to the highest bidder, he transferred all his shares in the company to the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. This meant that Rolex would never be controlled by a single person or greedy investors. Instead, it would be managed as a non-profit foundation dedicated to advancing watchmaking technology, supporting charitable causes, protecting the Rolex brand for future generations. This move ensured that Rolex would remain independent, focused on excellence, and untouched by outside pressure. Even today, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation owns and controls Rolex, using its profits to fund research, education, and humanitarian efforts worldwide. This was one of the greatest business decisions in history, one that made Rolex not just a company but a lasting legacy. The Rolex culture of perfection. With Hans Wilsdorf's vision set in stone, Rolex continued to push the limits of watchmaking. Rolex wasn't just about making watches, it was about making the best watches in the world. The company developed a strict set of rules and principles, ensuring that every single Rolex watch was made with unmatched precision and craftsmanship. Each Rolex takes about a year to manufacture. No shortcuts, no rushed production. Every single component is made in-house, from the smallest screw to the case and movement. Rolex watches undergo extreme testing. They are dropped, heated, frozen, submerged, and shaken thousands of times to ensure durability. This obsession with quality and precision is why Rolex watches last for generations. A Rolex isn't just bought. It is passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, becoming a family heirloom. Rolex and the world's most powerful people, Rolex, had now become more than a watch. It was a symbol of leadership, determination, and success. World leaders, athletes, and pioneers across industries proudly wore Rolex watches, each one telling a unique story of achievement. John F. Kennedy, the U.S. president known for his vision and leadership. Ayrton Senna, the legendary Formula One driver who pushed the limits of speed. Tiger Woods, the golf champion who redefined the sport. Elon Musk, the entrepreneur who is shaping the future of technology. What made Rolex special was that it wasn't just for the wealthy, it was for those who earned it. It became the watch people bought when they achieved something great, when they got their first big job, won their first championship, or reached a personal milestone. To own a Rolex was to say, I made it. The Rolex secret. Why it's still the best. Many watch brands have come and gone, but Rolex remains the most respected and desired watch in the world. What is the secret behind its success? 1. It never follows trends. While other brands chase fashion, Rolex stays true to its timeless designs. 2. It doesn't advertise celebrities. Rolex chooses pioneers, adventurers, and leaders, people who inspire the world. 3. It focuses on long-term value. A Rolex bought today will still be valuable 50 years later. This is why Rolex isn't just a brand, it's a legend. Hans Wilsdorf may have passed away in 1960, but his dream lives on. Rolex continues to be a symbol of excellence, perseverance, and success, reminding us that even the poorest boy can build something that will last forever. Conclusion. Lessons from Hans Wilsdorf's journey. The story of Rolex teaches us some powerful lessons. 1. Your past does not define your future. Hans lost his parents at a young age but built a billion-dollar empire. 2. Believe in your vision. He saw the future of wristwatches when no one else did. 3. Quality and trust matter. Rolex became successful because Hans focused on making the best watches, not just the most expensive ones. 4. Never stop improving. From the oyster to the perpetual movement, Hans kept innovating. 5. Give back to the world. He used his success to help others through his foundation. Hans Wilsdorf's journey from a poor orphan to the founder of Rolex is proof that with hard work, determination, and innovation, anyone can achieve greatness. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing success stories. See you in the next video.